Tonight we present
The Crying Woman, Llorona. On a gray afternoon in November 1848, a group of gold seekers settled along the San Joaquin River in California reported a chilling event. While working in the mud searching for riches, several witnesses claimed to have heard the heart-wrenching cry of a woman, followed by the sight of a spectral figure in a white dress. Hours later, a child playing near the camp disappeared without a trace. This was not the only incident. Similar stories began to emerge along the border between Mexico and the United States. The disappearances, always near rivers, raised deep fears among the locals, who associated the events with a legend that had already rooted itself in the region. La Llorona, the woman who wanders the waters searching for her lost children. The gold rush had transformed California into a place of cultural encounters. Thousands of people, including Mexicans, Americans, and indigenous migrants, arrived at the mining camps in the hope of finding fortune. The mountains and valleys were filled with men and women working day and night, removing earth and stone in search of even the slightest sign of wealth. However, it was also a time of tension and tragedy, where the exploitation of resources and people marked the landscape as much as the rivers of gold themselves. The miners' greed for the precious metal led to conflicts and imbalances, while the natives watched as their lands and ways of life were crushed by the unstoppable expansion of the camps. In the Mexican communities near the border, stories of La Llorona had deep roots. They spoke of a woman named Maria, who, in a fit of despair, had drowned her children in a river after being abandoned by her lover. Filled with regret, Maria took her own life, but her spirit was condemned to wander the bodies of water, crying and searching for the children she lost. The stories of La Llorona were told in town squares, in homes by the fire, and among passing travelers. These tales had been passed down through generations, changing according to the place, but the message was the same. The lament of a woman by the river was an omen of tragedy. The legend had crossed the border, taking root in the hearts of those who, though they had never heard it before, felt an inexplicable fear at the whisper of the water. In the 1849 records, the San Joaquin Camp Diary documented a disturbing pattern. At least 5 children disappeared in less than a month. The mothers of the camp, desperate, searched through the brush and the muddy waters, but found no trace of their children. Many parents began to fear the inexplicable, wondering if perhaps something much beyond a simple human disappearance was happening. A witness to these disappearances was Miguel Garcia, a Mexican blacksmith who claimed to have seen a tall, pale woman with long hair walking by the river the night before his nephew vanished. Miguel described how the figure seemed unreal, as if the wind itself had turned into a tangible presence. The air grew unnaturally cold as she cried with a heart-wrenching voice, "Oh, my children!" The memory of that eerie figure remained imprinted in his mind, and the feeling of despair and loss that emanated from her seemed to crush everything else. The disappearances also caught the attention of local authorities, who speculated about criminal gangs or wild animals. However, the Mexican community insisted that it was La Llorona, and many families began leaving offerings of candles and amulets by the river, hoping to protect their loved ones from what they saw as a supernatural threat. As the disappearances continued, more unsettling testimonies emerged. A young American, Jacob Miller, wrote in his personal diary how he followed a group of children playing near the river. As night fell, he saw how a mist formed over the water, darkening everything around him, and from it emerged a female figure. The children, according to the testimony, began to walk toward the river as if hypnotized, as though an invisible force was guiding them. Miller, terrified, fled to the camp and never saw the children again. The disappearances grew stranger, and the figures seen by the river blurred with the mist, as if they had never existed in the first place. The testimonies grew more and more inconsistent, as if reality itself was distorting under the weight of the inexplicable. A local investigation uncovered strange patterns. In every disappearance, the children appeared to have left behind small belongings by the riverbank: wooden toys, shoes, and in one case, a broken rosary. There were no signs of struggle, and calculations of the water level indicated that no child could have been swept away by the current. Something didn't add up, and the darkest fears began to take shape. For the locals, there was no doubt. La Llorona had crossed the border with the gold seekers and continued claiming victims. The more superstitious ones said that the gold rush had awakened the spirit, and now she was punishing those who disturbed the land and the water, no longer just as a lost mother, but as a vengeful entity. Tension in the camp reached its peak when a group of explorers made a macabre discovery. In a clearing in the forest, less than 2 kilometers from the river, they found a cave with strange inscriptions on the walls, mixed with human remains. One of the mothers from the camp identified a small shoe that belonged to her missing daughter. That night, the locals gathered to discuss the finding. While some suggested leaving the area, others insisted on investigating further. It was then that a man named Jose Ramirez, known for his knowledge of folk stories and traditions, quietly said, "This is no ordinary cave. It is an altar. And it is not just La Llorona. There is something else." The wind blew fiercely at that moment, extinguishing the lit candles. The river's echo carried with it a mournful cry that everyone recognized immediately. The next morning, a group of armed men, led by Jose Ramirez, decided to explore the cave despite the collective fear. Armed with torches and tools, they ventured into the darkness, where the inscriptions on the walls seemed to vibrate under the light of the flames. The carved figures showed unsettling scenes. Women crying by rivers, hooded figures performing rituals, and shadows that seemed to devour children. The atmosphere was dense, and the darkness felt like it was wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. The men felt watched, as though something was lurking in the shadows. In the center of the cave, they found a rudimentary stone altar. On it lay a white cloth covered in dark stains. Among the altar objects were bones, melted candles, and a medallion engraved with a symbol no one recognized. As they moved the cloth, they uncovered a rudimentary map carved into the rock, which seemed to indicate other nearby locations along the river where there might be more altars. Suddenly, a chilling scream echoed from the cave entrance. One of the explorers who had stayed behind ran to them, saying he had seen a woman dressed in white floating above the river. Upon returning to the entrance, they found only silence, but the air was thick with an unnatural coldness. The explorers returned to the camp with the objects they had found. As they examined them, Jose Ramirez recalled a story his grandmother had told him in his childhood. She spoke of the daughters of the water, spirits who protected the rivers and punished those who polluted or disturbed them. Although many confused them with La Llorona, their purpose was older and darker. They did not seek their children. They sought sacrifices to maintain the balance between the world of the living and the world of the dead. According to his grandmother's tale, these spirits had been invoked by the first civilizations that had inhabited these lands long before the arrival of the conquerors, and their anger was tied to the desecration of the bodies of water. The gold rush had disturbed that balance by altering the rivers, contaminating the waters, and stealing the very essence of the land. That night, while the camp tried to sleep, the river began to overflow for no apparent reason. The waters flooded part of the land, taking tents and tools with them. The locals fled as they heard the echo of a woman's cry among the currents. The water rose unnaturally, covering fields that should not have been reached by the floods, and carried with it not just objects, but a general sense of despair. Amid the chaos, a girl who had disappeared weeks earlier was found near the forest, barefoot and covered in mud. The girl, unable to speak, only pointed toward the river and murmured a word, "She." The adults tried to calm her, but when they looked toward where the girl pointed, they saw a white figure standing in the middle of the turbulent waters, motionless, watching them. The figure seemed to be waiting for something, as if it had given them a chance for redemption or condemnation, depending on their response. But no one dared to approach. The girl, upon seeing the figure, began to cry uncontrollably as her fingers pointed to a deeper part of the river, toward the dark forest. Desperate, the camp's inhabitants decided to perform a ritual based on local traditions. Jose Ramirez led the ceremony, asking for forgiveness from the river spirits and offering the riches they had obtained as offerings. By dawn, the waters receded and the crying stopped. However, the camp was abandoned shortly after, as no one wanted to risk provoking the supernatural forces again. The survivors scattered to other settlements, and the stories of the gold rush and the disappearances became part of the region's folklore. Years later, the area was absorbed by the growing civilization, and the events were relegated to the tales of the elders. However, the records from the San Joaquin Camp Diary and the testimonies of the few survivors remain as proof that, in the depths of the mystery, there are forces that defy human understanding. And on the quietest nights, some claim that the lament of La Llorona can still be heard among the waters of the river. The places marked on the map, though forgotten by most, continue to be visited by those seeking something more than gold in the dark waters of San Joaquin.
The questions don't end here, nor does our pursuit. If this story unveiled something you never expected to discover, then you're in the right place. Remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this tale with others who, like you, are drawn to the unknown. Here, mystery always finds its voice, until we meet again, where the inexplicable will once again serve as our starting point.